Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, wherever in the world you may be joining us from today. My name is Francesco Del Carpio, and I am the CFAL York Operations Coordinator. I would like to officially open the third 2024 session of the Emergency Management in Hospitals and Healthcare Speaker Series, presented in partnership with the Thunder Bay Regional Health Sciences Center. I will begin with a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge and recognize that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships with the territory upon which our campuses are located that precede the establishment of York University. The area is known as Takaranto and has been caretaken by the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat. It is now home to many First Nation, Inuit, and Métis communities. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, and that the territory is subject to the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. As this is an online event and our participants may be joining from various locations, I strongly encourage you to learn about the traditional land upon which you are located. With this, I welcome our moderator, our speakers, and our participants from around the world. Welcome to our webinar. Without further ado, it is my great pleasure to introduce our moderator, Misha Richard. Misha Richard is the current Emergency Preparedness Lead for the Thunder Bay Regional Health Sciences Center in Thunder Bay, Ontario, Canada. In this role, she acts as a subject matter expert, assisting with the development and maintenance of emergency management governance, training materials, and exercises. Misha also volunteers as an editor for the Canadian Journal of Emergency Management and is happy to be a collaborator and facilitator for this CFAL York series. She holds a Master of Disaster and Emergency Management degree from York University and bachelor's degrees from Western University and Brandon University in the focus areas of political science and disaster studies. Misha, thank you very much for moderating today's session and your ongoing support organizing this series. The floor is yours.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And good morning, everybody, or good afternoon where you are. I'll start off with just a really quick housekeeping note, and then I will jump into introducing our awesome speakers today. So the first part is I can see we've got some activity in the chat right now, and thank you very much for your participation in that space. The chat's going to be open throughout, so feel free to chat with one another. However, if you have any questions, we request that you put them into our Q&A space where I will moderate them, and I'll do my best to answer your questions as able. We might have a couple of points during the presentation we're able to stop and take some questions, as well as taking some questions at the end. So feel free to put them in there and I'll pose them to our speakers when we get the opportunity. But again, keep that chat active. I love to see the conversation in there. So now I get to introduce our speakers. I'm so excited that you guys were willing to participate with us today. And I'll start off by giving a shout out to Simon Bridgland, who's an emergency management specialist at Niagara Health. I'll give a quick overview of Niagara Health, just to give that picture to everyone that it's a multi-site hospital comprised of 5 sites and multiple satellite locations. They serve over 450,000 residents across 12 municipalities, making up Niagara region. Niagara Health is one of Ontario's largest hospital systems with 7,300 employees, physicians, and volunteers. So Simon's background, he's a registered nurse since 1995 and joined Niagara Health back in October of 2020. He has been instrumental in the rollout of new and refreshed emergency preparedness policies and procedures, the update of emergency code systems there, and the Code of the Month training program that they have, standardization of fire life safety training across the organization, as well as facilitating successful emergency drills and full-scale exercises. Very busy. Prior to his current role, Simon also worked in pre-hospital care as a primary care paramedic, as staff nurse and clinical leader in the emergency department, and various roles in occupational health and safety as well. Simon holds an honors diploma in nursing from Seneca College, as well as an honors graduate certificate in occupational health nursing from Mohawk College, and is currently working towards a bachelor's degree in adult education at Brock University. So again, very busy. Simon's passionate about health and safety and believes that every employee, patient, and visitor deserves to go home to their family. And when not working, Simon also likes to spend his time with his lovely wife and his 3 children and his dog. Now, I can also introduce Josh. Josh is also an emergency management specialist, with Niagara Health. Josh entered the healthcare field back in April of 2022, where he's been responsible for developing, updating, and maintaining business continuity plans for the regional health organization. In addition to business continuity planning, Josh also supports a number of other initiatives at Niagara Health, including the emergency code system, developing and facilitating exercises and drills for staff, as well as executive leadership, and is the co-chair of the Accessibility Advisory Committee. Josh holds a bachelor's degree in disaster and emergency management from York University and has spent his career working in the emergency management field proper. So prior to joining Niagara Health, he also spent several years working with the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing, where he led business continuity planning and was tasked with managing the building and ministry-specific fire safety and security planning. Several of other accomplishments was that, he also helped lead organizational-wide updated business continuity plans for critical and supporting systems, led the implementation of video remote interpretation at 5 hospital sites to expand interpretation capabilities between patients and hospital staff, and supporting the Ministry of Indigenous Affairs track and distribute rapid antigen tests to Indigenous communities during the height of COVID-19. So both very busy fellows, and it makes me all the more appreciative that they've taken time out of that schedule to be here today to talk to us about some extreme weather planning. So the floor is yours, Simon and Josh. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for this opportunity to share the work that Josh really has done on our severe weather COOP plan. He's allowing me to join the conversation today and ride on his coattails. Josh, over to you.
At all. It is a team effort. We like to say that I am Batman and he is Robin.
I'm Batman.
We will jump right in. So good afternoon, everyone, or good morning where you are located. Thank you so much. As Simon said, we're super excited to be sharing our experience with our code Maroon and the evolution of our severe weather COOP plan. So we'll kind of jump right in with our own land acknowledgement. Simon.
Thank you. Anytime we present, we always review our own Niagara Indigenous Land Acknowledgement. Again, Niagara Health is honored to provide service to people in 12 municipalities across Niagara region. This land's been occupied for thousands of years. There are many First Nation, Métis, and Inuit people across Turtle Island who live and work in Niagara today, and we have the privilege of supporting them in that role. So again, thank you for that.
Perfect. All right. So just a little bit of an overview of kind of what we're trying to achieve today and the purpose of our presentation today. So as a kind of the title I mentioned, really about Code Maroon, which is our severe weather here in the Niagara region and at Niagara Health. So to start, we'll kind of provide a little bit of a background of severe weather in the Niagara Health and the Niagara region. We are no stranger to severe weather just due to our geographic location. And as you'll see later on, it becomes pretty much an annual occurrence of us having to respond to the severe weather events. So after that little bit of a history and kind of background, we will jump into our case study. So we have a case study of our experience with Winter Storm Elliott. For those that are familiar, December 21st to the 26th of 2022. And it was a pretty nasty storm that actually had challenged us and put our process and procedures to the test. And through that process, we were able to kind of look back, reflect, and look at those kind of room for opportunities to improve our procedures and our processes. So we'll kind of touch upon some of those experiences throughout the storm, as well as our lessons learned and how we've tried to fulfill those gaps to ultimately better enhance our measures and ensure that we are better prepared for those weather events. And then lastly, we'll kind of touch upon our Niagara Health Severe Weather COOP plan. As we'll kind of go through, it was something that was utilized. However, definitely room for improvement in that aspect. And so we'll kind of touch upon some of those improvements that we've made to the plan to better enhance our preparedness going forward.
Thanks. Well, as Josh said, we've got a history of severe weather in Niagara. Anyone that knows Niagara knows that we are part of the Golden Horseshoe. We have fantastic weather during the spring and summer. If anyone's ever been to Niagara and visited any of our wineries, it's quite a unique location with really nice weather. Unfortunately, that also means it comes along with really severe weather as well. The Great Blizzard of 1977 still is in the minds of some of our staff that work at Niagara Health. Minus 18-degree temperatures, wind gusts of well over 110 kilometers an hour that actually blew out windows and forced snow and ice into homes and facilities. Lake Erie actually froze over, and there was 3 foot of accumulated snow on top of the frozen lake. The wind continued to push that onto land, and the result was that Niagara was snowbound for days upon days. October 2006 storm, really early storm that brought 30 centimeters of snow to Fort Erie and Port Colborne, basically shutting down both areas. 30,000 residents of Fort Erie without power, and it took as long as 8 days for power to be restored to that area. And then finally, as Josh mentioned, Winter Storm Elliott. It allowed us to test our severe weather COOP. We're going to go into a little bit more detail about Winter Storm Elliott, how it affected Niagara, and in particular, the hospital momentarily. Josh, back over to you.
Perfect. So just a little bit of an overview for our folks on the line around our code Maroon here at Niagara Health. So probably no stranger to most kind of healthcare settings of the implementation of our code Maroon as part of our robust kind of emergency code program here at Niagara Health. However, unlike others, it's part of our 21 color codes that we have here at Niagara Health, quite a few. But I would say it's probably one of our more active, especially during those kind of winter months. And so similar kind of following suit with all of our other codes, there's 3 key stages to our code Maroon. So stage 1 is our minor, and that's typically just our weather advisory alert provided by usually Environmental Canada. We get these pretty regularly, not only during the winter months, but obviously during kind of, year round. And typically we're kind of dealing with a lead time less than 6 hours. So most times this is kind of where our initial concerns kind of rise from. If we're hearing of some potential storms or severe weather on the rise, we'll kind of start with our code Maroon stage 1 minor, just to kind of send that alert that, hey, there could be something coming. We're going to look into it a little bit more. Our stage 2 is our major, and this is a weather watch or weather warning, flood watch, or tornado watch. This time we're kind of dealing with a little bit of a less lead time, so less than 4 hours. And then lastly, we have our stage 3, which is our critical, and this is a severe storm that is active or imminent, flood warning, tornado warning, and lead time immediate to an hour. Typically, I think the nice thing with our code Maroons, especially within the kind of the Niagara region, is that we do have that little bit of a heads up. I don't think it's too often that we're getting completely caught off guard by a severe storm or weather incident due to, probably the fantastic technology that our folks in Environmental Canada and all the weather tracking agencies and bodies probably have. So as I said, kind of our usual stage progresses from stage 1 to stage 3 in that manner, which is nice because we're able to escalate according to the actual incident and the development of the weather. But as I mentioned before, it is one of our more active codes. So you'll see in 2023, we had 6 code Maroon incidents, 2022, 7 code Maroon incidents, 2021, 15, and 2026. That does not mean that all of these code Maroons, escalated to a stage 2 or even to a stage 3. Some of them just might have been at that stage 1 and kind of not escalated further from there. Typically, when we're dealing with the stage 2 or stage 3, we might initiate our emergency operations center, which we'll speak to in a minute with our case study, but, not always for those stage 1s. Sometimes they just kind of get overlooked. We see that it's just a little, minor storm, that there's really no further implications to our, operations. So, they don't really escalate or go much further from there. Simon?
Thank you very much. Well, again, Winter Storm Elliott allowed us to take the Code Maroon process that we had in place, and really, it was we had an opportunity or two that were identified from that original plan. So, if you recall, Winter Storm Elliott was December 21st through 26th, 2022. Like most emergencies, it happened over a weekend and over a holiday. These things never happen Monday through Friday day shift when everyone is here. And so that was one of our biggest opportunities, was the communication opportunities that came out. It was a what was called an extratropical cyclone. There were blizzards, high winds, record cold temperatures. We had just over half a meter of snow dumped on Niagara region, wind gusts of over 120 kilometers an hour, and widespread power losses. All of our hospitals, fortunately, are backup power equipped. However, our issues really were the fact that all 5 hospitals are rather remote from one another. So most of our opportunities came from that. One of the unique features of Niagara region is we are bordered by the United States, so we don't have a lot of opportunity to move out of the region. And unfortunately, Buffalo also suffered quite greatly as well through that December 23rd to 25th storm. Josh, you want to share that timeline?
Absolutely. So over the slide, we're going to kind of look at our incident response timeline and kind of how things progress throughout the duration of the Winter Storm Elliott. So On December 22nd, we actually held our first EOC. So at this point in time, there really wasn't much of snow coming down or anything like that. It probably would have been at a code Maroon stage 1, right? We got the weather advisory that the storm is incoming, and we use this kind of emergency operations center as a time to kind of plan and prepare for any potential disruptions that the storm could cause. So some of the key items that were addressed kind of during this EOC, and I won't go too much into them because I know Simon will speak to them in a second a little bit more in detail, but things like our food services, how are we going to ensure that all of our patients, as well as staff, as we came to learn that staff will need some additional meals to support them. Bringing in patients early due to potential road closures and just traffic and congestion on the roadways due to the storm. Hotel arrangements for staff and physicians who may be out of town and can't get home safely. So how can we support those staff? Patient transportations. As Simon said, we have 5 hospitals and we are often transporting patients from one hospital to another for procedures and appointments. And, anticipating, again, potential road closures and blizzard-like conditions, we had to look at how that could work, if it could work and continue depending on, again, what might actually come of the storm. And then obviously encouraging staff to work remotely where possible. So recognizing that not all of our staff, can work remotely. It would be nice if they could, but they are frontline in most cases and they don't have that luxury. So for those that were able to work remotely, we highly encouraged it and them to work with their managers to support that process, just to kind of limit their mobility and their, potential risk of them having to come in these conditions. So following that initial EOC, we did release a corporate memo in the afternoon of the 22nd, which was the Thursday, just really providing, an update as to this is what we kind of know. We know the storm is coming in, and here's some steps that you can take as a staff member or physician to better prepare yourself. So, leave ample time, make any prior arrangements necessary because, you might be delayed or anything like that. So just kind of that preliminary messaging to staff that say we're on it, and, here's some things that you can do just to better prepare. So on December 23rd, the following day, we actually had, an additional EOC, and this was kind of separate, kind of related, but also separate from the severe weather that was incoming, and that was due to potential flooding concerns at our Port Colborne site. So our Port Colborne site sits directly on Lake Ontario, or Lake Erie, sorry. Not the best design in some cases when we talk about risks, but there was some potential flooding concerns due to, the rising sea levels. I believe it was the following day that there was temperatures of 10 plus degrees. So the melting snow led to some of the rising sea levels, and then with the high wind and gusts that were coming, really didn't present the best picture for our Port Colborne site. So there was some initial concerns, and I think we have a photo here to kind of look, image as to what it was kind of looking like. Luckily, we used some quick thinking, and we actually came up with utilizing some of our plows to create, these giant snow banks on the ridge of Lake Erie there to really prevent that water from creeping up too far inland and really impacting our hospital site there. So luckily, crisis was avoided in the situation. And aside from this emergency operations center that was activated, there really wasn't much of a concern following the activation of those kind of snow banks. On the December 24th, so this is now the Saturday, we did have a third EOC, which was held in the morning of the Saturday. We had a code gray utility failure, so we had a power failure at our Port Colborne and Newport, which are 2 separate buildings. However, they are connected via a kind of a tunnel. So both buildings were knocked out of power due to the power failure, and luckily they both are on backup power. So it wasn't much of a disruption because we were able to kind of ensure those continuity of services, and infrastructure was able to be brought back online relatively quickly. One of the things that we did actually find, and we've kind of had to make some arrangements for, was our retherm machines for heating up patient foods wasn't able to be plugged into the emergency outlets. So as you can imagine, when we have patients that need to be fed, a little bit of a challenge how we're going to heat those meals up. Luckily, we do have a number of contingencies in place for our food services, things like cold meals, switching to cold meal menus, as well as we have a series of emergency entree supplies available for staff and physicians. We did also release an additional communication to our staff on the 24th, really just kind of providing an update again as to what things have come to. So at this point in time, obviously there's been a lot of snow. There's been already a little bit of traffic congestion, staff scheduling issues due to the road closures and the just blizzard-like conditions out there. And we're now having some concerns around staff being able to leave work. We did have a number of staff that were, having to stay on site just due to the inability to leave due to the road conditions. So we're kind of right now in the thick of things on December 24th. There is a second EOC that was held on the 24th, and this was in the afternoon, approximately 2 p.m. And it was due to a code green at our Newport Center. So as I had mentioned before, the Newport Center is right, directly next to our Port Colborne site and connected via a tunnel. And we were able to, due to the prolonged disruption due to the power outage, even though it was on the backup power, this decision was still made to evacuate a few patients from our Newport Center into our Port Colborne Center. So I believe it was approximately 10 patients that were evacuated and temporarily transferred to our Port Colborne Center, just as a precautionary measure due to that continued power outage. As things couldn't get worse, we are now on Christmas Day, ruining everyone's Christmas Day with a code-based stage 3 that was announced at our Fort Erie site. Luckily, the code beige. Thankfully, with their code beige, it wasn't that long. This is on Christmas Day. It was a quick crisis averted. I think the network connectivity went down, and I think we were looking at approximately 2 hours of disruption. Due to that kind of short time, there was no actual disruption to our ability to provide our services and the continuity of services. So thankfully, crisis was averted. Even though there was a disruption in downtime, our ICT team was able to restore the issue relatively quickly, especially given that it was Christmas Day. Boxing Day, so December 26th, we did kind of conclude and wrap up our EOC activations. The situation outside with the actual severe weather had kind of calmed down. Obviously there was still some freezing temperatures and snow was on the ground. However, roadways were kind of opening back up, and we were able to kind of move patients, kind of business as usual or as normal as it could be in this situation. So we did release a final corporate memo to our staff, really just kind of thanking staff for their support. We know they had kind of been through a lot, and it was not really how anyone probably planned to spend their Christmas Day. So thanking them for their support and really just kind of a highlight of how, Niagara Health as a team kind of came together to really support this response. We had a number of community agencies that reached out to support us, a number of, again, teams that came together to really provide their services to our patients, which is our ultimate goal during these times.
Just before you flip over, Josh, can you flip back to that last slide? Just wanted to point out that December 22nd was a Thursday. The 23rd was a Friday, again, just before the long weekend and a holiday. So the on-call teams and the participants that were there for that first and second EOC were not the same on-call team that were on the 24th, 25th, and 26th. Our assumption at the time was that on-call teams would be communicating with each other as they went off and went on call. And what we found was there wasn't as a robust a conversation as well. So that was for us, again, communication was one of the biggest takeaways for this. All right, Josh, move forward for me, please, and thank you. So again, Winter Storm Elliott provided us with a number of service challenges across Niagara region. First one would have been pharmacy. Our pharmacy takes care of our centralized pharmacy, St. Catherine site, Niagara Falls site, Welland site. They take care of our Port Colborne and Fort Erie sites. They practice a just-in-time delivery system with the idea that winter weather, inclement weather was coming. They decided to increase the amount of medications that they were sending. Instead of a daily run, they sent an extra day's worth of medications. And thankfully, that came into play so that no patients were without regular medications. That has now been incorporated into into our severe weather plan. We're going to talk about that momentarily. Lab specimens. Our port and fort sites don't have in-house labs, so we worked on a couple of different ways to make sure that we could get samples from our urgent cares to the labs at our other sites. Food services, as Josh already mentioned, we couldn't use our retherm units because they're not powered by the backup generators. Our food services, the plan at the time was that they had 3 days worth of frozen entrees available in deep freezers at our remote sites. That has since been increased to a 5-day supply, not only for patients, but for staff and visitors as well. They have also created a process where they would have what they're calling microwave trains. So instead of using the large retherm units, several staff using several microwaves are able to get the hot food to our patients, staff, and visitors where necessary. Environmental Services is responsible for our linen service as well. It is delivered by a third-party vendor. Our linen services, our EVS, has ensured now that there is always a 2-day supply, and we increase that supply when we know there is going to be a major event on its way. Finally, staff scheduling. We had staff and physicians who were A, unable to get into our locations, but B, if they were on shift, they were unable to get out. That's why, again, linens really came into play, because we were also housing staff in extra beds that were available. Josh, back over to you about lessons learned.
There we go. All right, thanks, Simon. So looking back at our response and our experience with Winter Storm Elliott, there were certainly a number of opportunities in areas where, we know we probably could have done a little bit better, and we've certainly made some strides to, reduce those gaps, or really fill those gaps, really, as I mentioned earlier, to kind of be better prepared, knowing that, again, we're likely going to see winter storms, impact us again. How can we be better prepared? So a few of the lessons learned that kind of came out of that, the first one being that transfer of knowledge between our EOC members. So as Simon had mentioned, that team that was supporting our Emergency Operations Center on the Thursday and Friday didn't provide really any formal transfer of knowledge to that team that was taking over on call on Saturday, Sunday. I think what happened, and what this kind of causes is that team that taking over on Saturday, Sunday, to really be kind of left in the dark in terms of, what has already been done, where are things at, who's been responsible for what, and kind of has them starting at scratch, which is certainly not, best case scenario in the thick of an emergency. We want them to be, well equipped and well informed and able to better respond and better support, our response efforts. The other piece to this is in having that on-call team and that kind of, I guess, lack of transfer of knowledge is, I guess, what we're calling it. We missed actually individuals who were part of our calls on the Thursday, Friday, who weren't actually even involved in the discussion on Saturday, Sunday, because again, the on-call team that was taking over on that Saturday, Sunday just weren't aware or weren't informed as to who needs to be the representative from these program areas that need to be on this call. So unfortunately, there were a few members who were on the earlier calls that just weren't included or involved in the second or the third and fourth EOC. Which is obviously a gap, and again, that could be some critical information. Luckily, in this case, it wasn't, but that could be some implications in the event that we're missing some of those key players to that table. So one of the actually ways in which we've actually tried to address this is we have since piloted what we're calling this Microsoft Teams Daily On-Call Code Chat. So at the end of every day, Simon and I are responsible for updating this Teams chat to include the on-call team. And through this chat, what we're able to do is share all the chat history. So if on a Friday there was a disruption or an emergency event that occurred, we're hoping that those members who are on call on the Friday are able to utilize this chat to discuss, maybe some concerns, some challenges that they're experiencing. They can host or activate an emergency operations center or a Microsoft Teams call to kind of have those discussions. And they can put it all into this chat, which is a centralized location for everyone to access. As soon as that Saturday on-call team comes in and they're added to that chat, they have access to all that chat history, as well as any kind of documentation that might be conducted or put together for that incident response. So we're kind of keeping all incident-related discussions, files, documents, anything like that that might be helped or used to support that response in one centralized location. So that way anyone who's now being brought in to support the response can have access to it and be aware and be able to make decisions based off some of that information that might have been shared previously. The second lesson learned that I think really came out of this is that plans are only valuable if they are used. So funny enough, we actually did have a severe weather plan that was put together actually, shortly before Winter Storm Elliott had occurred. It was put together, it was approved, it was, approved by our Emergency Management Committee. However, it just wasn't used. It wasn't referenced or utilized. I think some members were under the aware that the plan was only to be used for flooding and not for other severe weather incidents. And so there was a whole bunch of guidance and resources in that plan that probably would have helped and support our response a little bit better, made some of that decision making probably happen a little bit quicker. However, it just wasn't used. It wasn't utilized, unfortunately. So, we've really had to kind of take this back and make sure that we have these critical resources available and readily accessible to our team, because Simon, myself, and our manager, who's often involved in with these responses, isn't always going to be there. So we need to ensure that they're confident and are able to access these documents in a timely manner. So we not too long ago, I think about a year and a half, had developed our emergency resource directory, ERD, for Niagara Health, and on there we now store all of our emergency resources. So whether that's our code, our emergency code policies and procedures, our job action sheets, our business continuity plans, and our severe weather COOP plan. So it's a one-stop shop that all leaders or all staff essentially that have a Niagara Health email account can go to and access these documents. The third one,
Gosh.
yeah. Absolutely.
Sorry, I have a question that came through the chat, and I feel like before you move on, it ties into your second point there. So not to interrupt the flow too much,
no,
but
gosh, no.
was curious about whether that plan had actually been exercised after development, but prior to this particular incident. So when you said there was a thought that it was more of a flooding focus, but was it one that hadn't actually been tested since it had been pulled together?
Correct. And I think the timing was a little unfortunate because it had just really been put together and approved like not too long ago before the actual event happened. So unfortunately, we didn't have an opportunity to really exercise that plan. Obviously, that would be the goal, right, is to ensure all of our plans have been tested. That only helps familiarize our staff with those plans. So unfortunately, to answer the question, it was not. Going forward, we have, and we actually approved this through our Emergency Management Committee, and this came out of the after action review of this incident, is to hold annual severe weather exercises with our staff and our executive leadership. So that way they have the opportunity to kind of go through the plan, make sure they're comfortable, make sure they're aware of the plan. And then that way, again, it's a good opportunity for us to learn and always strive to improve where we can with that. So hopefully that answers that kind of question.
Excellent. Thanks for letting me interject. Sorry.
No, of course, anytime. Just the third point there, and I think this kind of comes out of almost every incident response, I'm sure, is communication. Overall, I think the consensus is that we did communicate pretty well with our staff. I think we sent out a series of 3 or 4 memos to our staff to really kind of outline, they are not alone. There's a team in the back that are working to help support them where they can and put these plans in place to really mitigate those impacts as much as possible. Where I think we could have done a little bit better is utilizing more medians to communicate with our staff. I think primarily our approach was email and through these corporate memos. However, recognizing that not all frontline staff are checking their email or have access to their email all the time, maybe leaving them a little bit kind of in the dark as to what's been happening, or feeling like there isn't anything happening and they're just kind of left there alone. Obviously, it's not the case. We're in the background, and I think we can just improve on how we communicate with our frontline staff a little bit better going forward. The other component to this is we've since developed some language and some pre-scripted messaging for our staff for kind of staff disruptions. So working with our HR team and our communications folks, we've put together some language and some pre-drafted script to really help support some of the challenges and concerns that staff are raising. So things like our emergency leave of absence, we now have some dedicated language around what's considered an ELOA or what's not, and how you can utilize it in these kind of events, and things like hotel as well. We ended up again having, I think it was 3 or 4 hotels that we were providing to staff, or at a rate for staff to use that were close by in case they couldn't get home. So just kind of around some more communication on how that process works and who applies and who's applicable for kind of hoteling, things like that we've tried to develop and put into our plans just to really help speed up that process. And that way, again, if our communications team isn't available, at least that director on call can go to that document and have some knowledge and awareness as to how to respond to some of those concerns that are coming in from frontline staff. So just on that kind of lessons learned and after action review, obviously the big change that came out of our response was the update to our severe weather COOP plan. So there were a lot of changes, I think, that came out of it. One of the main changes was we tried to actually consolidate the plan to be consistent with our other business continuity plans. So at this time, we had recently underwent the update of our program-specific business continuity plans, and we had a whole thorough plan in terms of, what does activation look like, who has the authority to activate the plan, what does escalation look like if needed, and we tried to make sure that this severe weather COOP plan is now consistent with that. We wanted to make sure that they do kind of follow the same suit and include some of that critical information that's necessary to support our leaders who are going to be the ones ultimately to utilize these plans. Other pieces of our severe weather COOP plan that really went under some updates, I'll say, is our severe weather response structure. So making sure that we have all the correct parties available and included in these discussions, right? When we talk about kind of a severe weather and knowing some of the disruptions that can occur with them, we want to ensure that we have, appropriate representation from all of our program areas, whether that's our, patient registration, food services, pharmacy, lab, all of those are critical to supporting our service continuity. So really outlining what that response structure looks like. We do follow kind of a modified, I'll say, IMS structure here at Niagara Health. So really putting it into that kind of perspective will hopefully help make it clear as to, who needs to be involved and what does that reporting structure look like. The other piece that we've added is some staffing considerations. Again, knowing that we had some staffing concerns around, ability to get into work, the ability to leave work, we wanted to make sure that we had some language and some processes available for our team to be able to act quick and respond to these concerns. And then lastly, the other, I would say, big update that's not only been valuable for our COOP planning and severe weather plans is our contingency considerations based on past successes. So we kind of took what worked well in our response to Winter Storm Elliott. So for example, upstaffing medications for routine and unique medications at our port and Fort. That was something that worked well, that was able to be implemented. We've now since captured that as a response or, a consideration for our pharmacy team to look towards and see if that could be implemented for future scenarios. The one nice thing that came out of the severe weather COOP plan, and I'll pass it over to Simon in a sec, is that it's a severe weather COOP plan, but it can also be reframed as kind of the special event plan and planning for special events. Really, a lot of it looks at, road closures, what happens if we can't get staff in or out, what happens if we can't get patients in or out, what does that look like for local road closures. So as I'll pass it over to Simon, we've been able to actually utilize this plan, not only for severe weather, but for some of our other special event planning, which Simon will speak to in a second here.
Thanks, Josh. So our severe weather plan kind of grew out of a couple of different plans, including the Canada Summer Games 2022. There was a vast increase in the population, both with athletes and the support staff and people attending Niagara region. So we had road closures. It was difficult for staff to get in. All of that got combined into our severe weather plan. And as Josh says, it's now more of a special event plan that we've used in order to help us plan for the eclipse happening on April 8th. It doesn't matter why our roads are closed. Are they, covered in snow, or is it filled with cars of 500,000 people coming into Niagara Falls to view the eclipse? So again, we were able to roll it out for Frosh Week, for festivals, all sorts of events that are happening here in Niagara. We use a modified severe weather plan to help ensure that we're meeting all of those benchmarks. So for planning, Niagara region has been planning for the solar eclipse for well over 2 years now. We've been involved in Niagara Health on that committee to try and figure out how we're going to respond to, again, 500,000 people in Niagara Falls. They're calling for up to 1 million people within Niagara region itself. So, that's going to cause some staffing. I don't like the challenges, opportunities opportunities for our staff to get into work. Continuity, again, same issue we'd have at a severe storm. How do we get medications and food and linen deliveries done to our remote sites? Our severe weather plan comes into effect, and we're making sure that that gets done ahead of time. And ultimately, communications. What they're calling for is that cellular communications, for example, for the solar eclipse, are going to be a problem in Niagara, not because of anything happening from the sun, but because we've got 500,000 people coming in, taxing the cellular systems. So we've got continuity plans and contingencies in place to help us with our communications as well. As a former frontline staff member, the further I get away from frontline care, the more support I realize has always been there, that we've not been really good at communicating to frontline staff. Events like this, the storm, the eclipse, has given us an opportunity to ensure that not only our on-call and senior team are being made aware of what's going on, but also frontline staff are now much more involved, and those lines of communications are remaining open at all time. So I'd like to open it up now to questions if we haven't asked those questions. And at the same time, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for this opportunity to share some of the amazing work that's being done here at Niagara. I'd also like to share emergency preparedness at niagarahealth.on.ca is an email that we all share here. If you have any questions, any follow-up, I know that there was some requests to share policies and procedures. By all means, if you want to work through Misha to get that done. Otherwise, emergency preparedness at niagarahealth.on.ca. And I'll open it back up to the team.
Okay, fantastic. So before I start going into all the kudos, because I'll give you lots of gratitude and thanks in a moment, I'll start off with, we don't have any questions in the chat at this time. So I'll give some folks time to populate a few in there because I have a couple of my own. So again, for any of the attendees, I know there's been some conversation in the chat, but I haven't seen any additional targeted questions come through for Simon and Josh. So put those in the Q&A if they come to mind. I wanted to chat with you folks as far as, so to clarify to some of the attendees, we do have code gray as a standard emergency color code in Canada. And we have one side of it, which is, if there's the air exclusion, and then the other side of code gray is if there's some sort of infrastructure disruption. So for a lot of us, we don't have a dedicated code maroon. We've lumped some of these response elements and considerations under our code gray infrastructure. So I know earlier on in the presentation, Josh, you commented on you had power outages to deal with, you had network issues to deal with. And so sometimes those get viewed at an organizational level as being under code gray. Do you have any of sort of the history of where code maroon specifically ended up coming from? And how does that announcement, let's say, get made? So how does that look differently? Because for some of us, we think of, this is what goes out over the PA system is we've got a code gray power loss. And in this case, you've got this dedicated one. So I know you mentioned that big storm, but I was just wondering a little bit about that evolution of Maroon specifically, especially for those on the call that aren't familiar with that as a code policy.
I can take that one, if you don't mind. So we all know 1986, the Ontario Hospital Association said to all Ontario hospitals, here are your, I think it was 8 standard color codes. Hospitals have tried to remain similar across the province. When I first started out, I was a casual nurse at 4 different hospitals. It makes it so much easier when I go to different hospitals and they have the same color codes. At Niagara Health, they added and have added some extras. So again, Code Maroon was one of those that severe weather really hadn't been dealt with specifically under a Code Gray, which might have helped us with a air exclusion, as you said, or a loss of power. being here in the Golden Horseshoe, our history of severe weather, it was felt that a code Maroon should be a separate and distinct for severe weather, much like, as Josh mentioned, code Beige, which is an ICT failure. So our computer systems go down, our telephone systems go down. Again, that is dealt with by a separate response team from the communications and technology team, for example. And of course, our most recent one would be Code Lavender. A lot of the staff that were on duty and had to stay behind, we declared a Code Lavender for them, which is that staff care. It enables a specialized team to come in and provide that extra support. So as Josh said, we have 21 color codes here at Niagara Health. All of them are here because we've had distinct issues that the senior team felt warranted its own specific color code. We are running out of colors. Yes, thank you.
Yes. I think the other nice thing with our code Maroon is that, as I mentioned, typically if we're activating that, which does follow kind of very same suit as per, our other codes. So we have the code email that goes out. I believe there's the overhead paging that goes out, depending corresponding with the actual stage that we're in. But the one thing that I think it allows us really to do is have that preliminary planning, because again, most times in these storms, we have a little bit of heads up. So, if we activate a stage 2 or stage 1 or stage 2, we're still not in the thick of things. Like, we haven't necessarily been directly impacted for the most case at this time. So we have time to get some, activation of our code, give staff a heads up. We're able to kind of plan and prepare some messaging for staff. A storm is coming, prepare, make arrangements if you have children care or anything like that. Which I think, if we're talking about like a code gray and our power outage, for us, at least at Niagara Health, we're out of power currently. We need to respond now because we don't have power. So I think giving us that buffer time to really respond and prepare our response, I think helps us and be able to better message to our staff and our physicians to make those arrangements. And really, again, as I mentioned, kind of mitigating those impacts as much as possible to our organization.
Yeah, that's great. There's a question in the chat where somebody was asking as far as communications and support from the province, or let's say like Ontario Health, for the storm that you were discussing. So, but how do you ensure that all the hospitals in the region are aware of what each other is, or could be facing, and how do you support one another? So, I mean, I'm in an area where we're kind of the main kind of regional hub, and there are some community hospitals as we're branching out, but you've got a number of different hospitals that are under your belt, but then also it's a storm has no delineated boundaries. So was there some kind of additional messaging or support that took place in preparation for a severe weather incident like this for that kind of geographical space?
So in particular, we are thankful for groups like this and opportunities like this to help build those relationships. So for example, shout out to Andrew, Hamilton Health Sciences. We border on Andrew's territory as well. When we look at the Haldeman War Memorial, again, that would be our next closest hospital. So we in Niagara Health are able to, get the information out to our own staff, our own physicians, volunteers, etc. But because of the relationships, Misha, that we have here with webinars like this, we're able to work with our partners. The one thing I'd like to see more of is cross-border as well. Homeland Security with hospitals right across the river. I would love to be able to work on those relationships as well. That's our next step.
And with that, we did have, obviously, we're in communication with the Niagara region and our folks within Niagara EMS and the NRPS. Certainly, we were trying to, request some support for kind of the roads, and, can we get some support for getting our staff in to the hospital and some of our physicians. So we did have that kind of relationship and communication happening. We usually, I think we actually just kind of stopped and reverted to a new process, but had a dedicated liaison position on our on-call team. So, Simon, myself, and our manager, Patty, were, on call in the event that Emergency Operations Center was activated after hours, we would be brought in to help support communication with our external partners, whoever that be, whether that's the region or partnering hospitals, just to really make that connection with the team who's actually leading that response. So we had that process in place. We've now kind of switched to our just risk on call is responsible for that, and so we've gone through kind of the training with them just to make sure that they're comfortable in making those connections with our external partners and agencies.
I have another question, so I'm seeing some of them pop in. I'll be conscious of time. We've got a few more minutes here to take up more questions. This one ties back to when I originally reached out to you folks to talk about this. And I said, Code Maroon, like you're marooned at the hospital. Somebody was complimenting you on the presentation, but asked if the plan includes elements around evacuation or receiving evacuees. Is it largely a shelter in place, pardon me, kind of focused, and wondering if any EHS or field field guidelines are included in those procedures.
Yep, fair enough then. I'll take it. Yeah, it's mostly a shelter in place. How do we best prepare our staff to support each other, our patients, and our visitors within the facilities? Again, there was a concurrent code gray with a loss of power and a code green from one separate building into Port Colborne. Our code maroon really doesn't talk to the evacuation process. That is separate within the code green policy and processes. Again, code maroon is more how do we support the continuity of business at our sites when we are not physically able to get there and get the supplies in place. So it's more of a shelter in place.
Okay, and all of this makes sense to me when you're describing this. To be clear, also for a number of teams, since you've been saying, continuity of operations, for a lot of teams, there's very much that kind of response focused when we're thinking of our code policies. And some of these elements end up overlapping with business continuity. Obviously, Josh, that's been your kind of background and strength in this. And the code maroon kind of overlaps with both of those pieces, since we get a bit of lead time knowing that you have the potential for there to be a severe weather incident, still requires those actual key responses in the moment. Somebody was asking as far as, do you notice differences in how leadership or operations staff engage with planning for things like Code Maroon, as far as, when you're getting those updates out about your plan or how you're engaging with them? What is that? What do the differences look like? I could see Simon nodding already. You've had experience.
Right. So, we try with our EOCs to have the minimum number of people, just key players. And what we found through especially Code Maroon with Storm Elliott, the number of people that need to be aware and need to participate and need to be part of the planning increases dramatically. It's not just food and pharmacy and lab, it's registration, it's our physical plant folks. So one of the lessons learned was the number of people involved in the pre-planning when we declare a Code Maroon has increased dramatically. But it's because if we don't involve everyone, they can sometimes feel left out, and they are in their own way key players as well. So it's occupational health and safety, wellness as well. Everyone it deserves to be part of it. Ultimately, what it comes down to is everyone deserves to go home at the end of their shift. Let's make that as easy as possible by getting the right people involved at the beginning. And that goes back to the work that Josh is doing, taking these color codes and creating continuity of operations plans that are posted for everyone to see, so that we make sure everyone gets involved, everyone gets to go home.
And I think there's always that challenge with, how do we communicate what's being done strategically and planning up top to frontline staff. I think that's certainly always a challenge. And I know coming out of this and not too long ago, our communications team had recently updated their crisis communication plan, really with the goal of, how as an organization can we better communicate, not only, externally, but internally as well, and making sure that everyone has, information to know that they are not alone and that they are supported, and having the information to also properly respond themselves, because sometimes, again, our staff have, roles and responsibilities that they need to execute. And if they don't know them, they're not communicating communicated that, and then how are we expecting them to complete that? So I think through our communications team, they play a fantastic role in our emergency response and are usually always actively engaged in our emergency operations centers and our discussions. So through them, we're able to communicate with those staff. I think, as I had mentioned previously, looking always for ways to, better communicate with staff and not just always rely on good old trusty email, because our frontline staff aren't necessarily walking around with their phone, just like, maybe Simon and I are sitting at our computer are. So whether that's, leadership going down onto the units and doing rounds and kind of communicating that way, or, at bed meetings, things like that, I think we just need to, better execute and utilize those methods rather than always reverting to email.
One of the other things that we've identified recently is turnover and institutional memory. And so making sure that these documents are available to those coming in behind us as well. Again, making sure that there's always someone aware of what has already happened so that we don't end up repeating the mistakes of the past.
So I think there's one last question, but also before I forget, you had listed the email address. So typically we'll say, hey, email us with the CFAL team and we'll act as a filter. However, Simon and Josh did note that because they do have a shared email address at their organization that deals with emergency management, is if you're able to pop that in the chat. I think there's a few folks that might have some more targeted questions that they can ask you directly following this presentation, not just the sharing of materials, because obviously I can highlight at this point in time, the session is recorded and we do get them up in a pretty timely manner. So if folks have questions that come up, then they can always reach out to you later. But hopefully having this presentation as a recorded resource later will answer some of their questions. Thank you, Simon. I can see that in there. We'll make sure that gets circulated. There's one question that's a really specific one, since different organizations use different crisis information management software tools. So some groups are using things like Teams, which is one that you have mentioned that you are using, and you're trying to use it in some different ways. And specifically, since you said there's this chat that's been pulled together, is that somebody was commenting what they were aware of is that there's a limit as far as data retention in the chat. And if this has posed any sort of issue for your organization, or how you're managing, let's say, the record keeping with some of these pieces.
So nothing that we've come aware of so far in terms of data retention. So again, it's just a Teams chat. We update, we bring in the new members as necessary. So usually every day in the weekend, we populate it for Saturdays, or Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So we add the 3 of them. Nothing that our ICT team has raised in terms of data retention. The only concern that we have since found was the limit in terms of the number of participants to start a call. So the way that we have it structured is that, say if it's an on-call for a Friday, or sorry, we'll do Thursday because Friday is usually the weekend. So Thursday, it's about 12 participants in that group. Our EOC director on call has the authority to activate an emergency operations center should one be needed, and essentially they just join, start a call within that group. So everyone then gets the notification. We do have a resource center still notifying them as per usual process, and it's just a second call from our Teams chat that will essentially bring them into an emergency operations center. I believe, Simon, correct me if I'm wrong, that limit is about 20 or 25 participants in that group chat at a time before we can, or if we exceed that limit, then we're unable to create a call, which presents a challenge on long weekends like we just had. So I think we got up to 27, if I'm not mistaken. And what we've suggested is that anyone in that chat has the ability to remove participants. So they can either remove participants who are not on call. So for the weekends, we normally add Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So they can remove, if it's a Friday, they can remove the Sunday participants and we can just add them back in later. The other piece to that is that they can either just create an additional side chat or a side Teams call and then just invite the people that are on call to support that. But so far, like I said, we piloted it for about, 2 months, I believe, right around there. Unfortunately, we actually haven't had too many, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, we haven't actually had too many instances, knock on wood, where we've actually really had to utilize and test it. There has been some discussion in the chat in terms of a few little minor code responses, but nothing where we've really actually had a full, EOC activation and really tested that. We do have a whole separate tab dedicated towards files and attachments attachments. So if there are anything, like we put in, pre-populated it before we had launched it with some training videos just on, how to join an EOC, how to create an EOC, how to add or remove members. So anyone that can come in, they are just as a standalone file in that tab, as long as they have access to the chat history, which we just make sure when we're adding them, they do. They should be able to access that. So shortly, to answer your question, we're not aware of any data retention at this point in time. Our ICT team has not raised any concerns from that perspective. Certainly, if we do run into that issue, we'll have to then obviously consider how we're retaining some of that information, some of that knowledge. I think predominantly we're looking at it for an incident that lasts maybe a few days, really just to ensure that transfer of knowledge. Because in an EOC that maybe happened, I don't know, 2 or 3 months ago, we do kind of have that formal IAP process and the minutes that are being taken from there. So we can always go back to that in terms of that knowledge and that history of what's been discussed, but it's really for kind of those 3 or 4 day, even 5-6 day long disruptions where we're having new team members come in for their rotation and they just need to be made aware of what's happened. So, hopefully we don't run into that issue. We're not aware of anything at this point in time, but certainly if we do, we'll follow up and let others know in terms of what our response is and if we've had to kind of deviate from our team's chat.
So I think we're pretty close to time. So at this point, I can say I greatly appreciate Josh, Simon, both of you taking the time to speak with us today and to also open up to allow time to have questions, and all of your answers are detailed, greatly appreciated. I think one of the big takeaways for me, and hopefully is the same for everybody on the call, is how important our actual business continuity planning is, and that having that foundation allows us to be able to apply the appropriate emergency response actions and should alleviate, that length of time that we have to try and work through recovery processes. So all of these things kind of feed in as a part of that cycle, and also being able to see how you've applied plans and processes to multiple types. So discussing your severe weather plan and being able to repurpose that to meet the needs of other responses. It's really, really valuable. It's a great reminder to the rest of us to not be so rigid in how we're applying some of these things. So really appreciate it. Again, the email was put in the chat, everybody there. If you have additional questions, follow up, please, pose that to Josh and Simon. Again, thank you so much for your time and being presenters for us today.
Thank you very much. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I just want to quickly echo my thanks as well. Thank you, Josh and Simon, for that great presentation. Thank you, Misha, as always, for moderating and helping organize the sessions. And of course, thank you to everyone in the audience for participating and joining us, asking questions. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to be here and to participate in our sessions here. So just as another quick reminder, this is a monthly series, first Wednesday of every month. So there will be another session on May 1st. So please mark that on your calendars and continue sharing the registration link in all of your networks, as registration is always open and free. And I saw that Dr. Asghari also mentioned that we do have a lecture on Friday at noon Eastern Daylight Time about the solar eclipse, some safety tips and tricks from some experts here at York and elsewhere as well. So if that is of interest, that link was also sent in the chat, or you can find it on our CFL website. Yeah, and with that, just one last big thank you to everybody, and I will stop the recording.